Hi, we're having a bit of I'm actually going to stop this video because we're having a bit of an internet crisis at the moment. I mean, it's not great. It's not bad. It just keeps fluctuating though. And that's not great. Hold on one second. Apologies for this. I should have enough. Are we back to good? It's being weird. All right. It's just fluctuating a lot. Anyway, I'm Rob Bowron from Sharp College Football. And we're going to talk about Texas today. A team that, I honestly, I feel like I'm excited to talk about all these teams. We certainly, as we have run into and talked through, some of the teams after we got past Michigan. Some of these teams have some fairly significant upside. I think Texas is a team that has potentially some really significant upside. And I say that because most of what we think of as or most of the guys that were like the top offensive coordinators in college football a couple of years ago are now head coaches. Steve Sarkisian, of course, the offensive coordinator of the best of Nick Saban's Alabama offenses by a long shot, now the head coach of Texas. And Texas is a team that, I think coming into, I certainly expected them to, I did not expect them to find themselves in the situation we found them in last year, which is where they had really significant improvement on both sides of the ball. And Texas is a little bit, last year's version of Texas may remind you a little bit of, Nebraska from the year before, and that they were very unlucky. Texas is a very good team that did very stupid things in many ball games, and then ended up with their win-loss record different, quite a bit different. And this very much happens. I realize that, and maybe we should start with this. Maybe we should start with a little bit of a caveat, right? Listen, man, there's this thing called, I like to call the illusion of record. Part of why we like football, I think part of what makes people sort of underneath the surface, maybe sort of below the sort of understandings of why people like football as a sport. I think one of the attractions of football as a sport is the randomness component within football. The people talk about this sort of all the time. People say this stuff to me all the time, like the game's not played on paper. I mean, true. But, is that even amongst what we may think of as likely outcomes, unlikely outcomes happen, and they happen fairly often. And Texas had Texas was sort of the team that continually had unlucky outcomes happen to them. They did good things, 75% of the game, and then 25% of the game is, and 25% of their drives, they did really bad things. Really bad things. And so Texas is a team coming into this season that I think is, in some ways people, and they're different. That Nebraska team from 21 lost a lot of production. They were clearly projected to be lower than they were the year before. This Texas team might be more like 2015 Washington. And yeah, there's some guys that were on that 2015 Washington staff on this staff. But they might be more like 2015 Washington, and that Washington team was a really good team with a really mediocre record that really put it together the next season. Texas might be more like that. And I realize we collectively within college football have to, and it's a running joke on the interwebs, the Texas is back joke. You all get it. If you're watching this, you're deep into the college football. You're deep into college football if you find this video. Anyway, I get it that if I'm out here saying like Texas is, hey, actually Texas might be back. That gets said nearly every year, right? I mean, they recruit really well. They're going to get projected really high because of that. They're always going to have a really highly compensated staff that's going to be made up of well-regarded coaches, at least until maybe the Texas effect kicks in and things are to go sideways with their reputations. But I do think this Texas team, I think when we go back through the advanced stats from last season, they were quite good. They just did dumb things in a lot of games. And I think if you look at this coming back into this season, they return a lot of that production that, and that's really, I think, good, should make them different than 21 Nebraska, should make them more like 2016 Washington. Now, I'm not saying like Texas is going to go on and like go on a playoff run. Like that's not Texas. I think Texas's back could be as much as like Texas may win double-digit games or something like that, right? But Texas also, because they have Sarkisian, their offense was decent last season. Yours was bad, really, really bad, and we'll get into that. But they're really like Texas might be a quarterback away. I mean, the defense made phenomenal progress in the DC's second year, and with Gary Patterson potentially helping out as well. I mean, sort of figuring out how to correctly apportion credit for that is a little more difficult, but they really did make significant progress. I think they could be a lot. I mean, I do. I think this Texas team could be a lot better than what we saw last season in terms of record and more consistent. Anyway, so I'm Rob Bowron. I'm the econometrician behind Betarank, an advanced stat system for college football. I need a drink of water. All the data you see in Betarank is provided from the same folks that provide data to the College Football Playoff Committee. I'm running through some fancy modeling on a server I run out. It does. I should say, like, most of the stats you're going to see are from Betarank. They're controlling at the very least for tempo, for field position, for opponent. They also control for garbage time. At the very least. And then we'll also cover some what I think of as advanced-ish stats. I'll call out what those are, why I think they're interesting and useful still. But I will say, like, if you're going to comment and I'm going to start caveating with this. A friend of mine or a friend on the Twitter machine suggested this. Like, I'm just going to caveat this. Like, don't comment with points per game. Like, points per game it just tells me you don't understand. It's like you don't understand what at bats are in college football, right? Like points per game is not the relevant metric. It's just not. Like, you want to come back with like raw points per drive, that's fine. Like, that's a much more interesting statistic to talk about. I would still argue like, hey, maybe we should control for opponent. Maybe we should control for starting field position. But just coming back and saying like, you're crazy, these numbers don't make sense, we scored blah, blah, blah points per game, is just sort of telling me that, I don't know, like, you're just mailing it in. So don't mail it in. Like, make an effort, my friends. Like, figure out what we're trying to talk about here. Why controlling for those things are important. When we talk about things, when we try to isolate who's good and who's not, because otherwise, like, the data is just largely uncomparable, right? Like, teams that are going to play very different schedules, teams that have very different styles and may, have very different tempos. Points per game is possibly the stupidest way that you could compare them. So just skip it. Please. It's the year of our Lord. We have sat through like all the Chip Kelly offenses, all of that, and as well as like scoring going way up in college football, for a bit, and then it's come back down. And I think that's part of like scoring coming back down, and we talked about this on some of the other previews, scoring coming back down, as well as some of the the hires that have been made at some of the other big schools. I think there's an opening for schools that have, a top offensive mind still sitting around there that could maybe put up a big number. And Texas is one of those schools. So Steve Sarkisian's your head coach, excellent offensive coordinator at Alabama. They made significant progress. They finished at number 7 overall last season in Betarank. far better than their record, and we talked about that a little bit. They were at number 48 in 21, so there's really significant improvement over the prior year. They sit at number 15 overall in coaching and development, and part of that, their improvement in coaching and development in particular, comes from the fact that Texas doesn't normally return a lot of production. And so they do recruit well. They're not like, I mean, they're at number 7 overall in, the 2-year rolling recruiting ranking. But they're not in the same range of, some of the other schools out there. I mean, like it's funny to say this about Texas, right? I mean, they have literally 2 5-star quarterbacks that we're going to talk about to potentially choose from. They do recruit really well, but they're not necessarily, I think, overall across the board in like Alabama, maybe in A&M's or even Georgia's range in recruiting, right? They're close. They're very close, but they're not quite there. And I do think Sarkisian could potentially get them there for sure. They're at number 20 in returning production this season. And so I think that's part of the reason we have them projected so high, in addition to the fact that like they were an inconsistent, but still largely very good team last season. They were number 12 in special teams last season. That's a good number for them. To be able to compete and stay near the top of college football, you really need to be firing on all cylinders. Like you're not going to catch up to, Georgia or Alabama. If you're leaving money on the table, and special teams is mostly the place kicking game. Texas was pretty good there last season. So let's go ahead and hop in. Let's do the offensive and defensive run through. So oddly enough, even though Sarkisian, as I talked about, is I think one of the best offensive minds in college football, Texas's offense finished at number 14 in beta rank last season. I mean, a pretty good gap between them and, the top offense in college football in Georgia, and some of the really good offenses out there. And I think, they did make significant improvements. Sarkisian, of course, is also your offensive coordinator here. They were at 37 and 21. So this is huge improvement for them to get up to number 14. But they also really had some struggles last season. They were number 9 in drive efficiency. This is probably their best metric. I mean, they do a good job putting together long drives to put up points. They did a good, and some of that is play calling. Some of that is execution. They did a really good job at explosive drives, putting up big plays. These two are two of the most important components going into beta rank. These are still numbers that I think for them to hit where they want to be offensively, these are both going to have to improve coming into this year. Play efficiency is the least important of the core 4 beta rank metrics. This is outside of explosive yards per play. They did give a decent number here. I mean, I should take that back. This is not a great number, 26 overall. I mean, at least for where Texas wants to be, right? Like if you want to get up into having a top 5 offense, 26 in play efficiency, even if it is the least important of them, you still need to do better than that. Negative drives. This is their worst number. So this is 3 and outs, turnovers, a lot of dumb turnovers for Texas last season, a lot of dumb 3 and outs, a lot of things where the defense was able to impose bad things on them, or they just made huge mistakes. No big run pass split. Of course, Bijan Robinson's moved on to the NFL, but 20 ineffective rush, 26 ineffective pass. I mean, they really need to improve. They were not at all a particularly good passing team. I talk about this, with the addition of more teams in, you would say we're going to say 69 Power 5 teams coming into this season. Power 5 teams have different resource levels than group of 5 teams. Like I try to grade Power 5 teams on a 1 to now 69 scale with the additions into the Big 12. Here we're going to talk with Texas, they were a middle of the road passing team in the Power 5 last season, and yours was bad. I mean, you can't sugarcoat it, particularly down the back stretch. I mean, yours was really bad. In modern college football, you expect to see quarterbacks completing north of 63, probably aiming for around 65% of their passes. Yours completed 58.1% of his passes last season, 7.4 per. I mean, most of the quarterbacks we've been talking about, from teams that were quite good last year throwing the football and moving the football around, are averaging around 9 per attempt. This tells you Ewers is not only not getting the ball down the field terribly well with his per attempt average, but not completing very well either. I mean, just a really abysmal season for Quinn Ewers. I don't know. I would not at all be shocked if he's not your starter. At least at some point this season. From what we saw last season, he looked completely lost with what was going on in college football around him. So, I mean, and largely, I mean, I think they would have been better off playing another quarterback last year instead of Ewers. Anyway, of course, in comes Arch Manning, another 5-star all-world prospect that Texas is happy to land. I don't know if it's going to be Manning. My guess is if it's not going to be Ewers, it is going to be Manning. But Ewers, I don't think Texas can afford to keep running out the Ewers we saw last season. I just think they're going to have too much talent around him. And the defense made such big strides. Ewers was absolutely holding the offense back last year. They sat at 2.85 line yards. This is a rough estimate from Football Outsiders of the yards you can attribute in rush to the offensive line. That put them at number 31 overall. That's obviously something they'd like to improve, I think. They had a 4.1% sack rate. That put them at 25 overall. Sack rate's a bit more of a quarterback stat. So, like Ewers has to get the ball out. They need to stop doing bad things to themselves. Another noted one to come back is Isaiah Nair, former Wyoming transfer, highly regarded wide receiver, and they got out of the transfer portal, injured himself last season, didn't participate at all. I mean, injured himself in spring ball. He should be back. That might help. I think in the wide receiver core, but yeah, I mean, I think Texas, if you're to talk about the offense, they absolutely have to get the passing game going for sure. They're number 3 in returning production on the offensive side of the ball. Offensive returning production is more correlated with next year's performance than is recruiting, at least, like I said, for offense. This is a really good sign for Texas, a sign that they could potentially really put it together and be able to put up more points this coming season. On the defensive side of the ball, Pete Kwiatkowski is your defensive coordinator, really highly regarded DC. And Kwiatkowski, I mean, you see some of the Kwiatkowski split here. At Washington, Kwiatkowski really focused and was one of the early, at least within college football defenses, that really focused more on taking away big plays. You see this a lot in the NFL, an emphasis on taking away explosives and being willing to give up maybe a little more underneath. If you run through here, that's exactly what you see when you look at these numbers. So their defense, number 6 overall last season, they were at 57 and 21. I mean, and there were real questions about whether Kwiatkowski was going to work out, whether they need to make a change after one season. I wasn't expecting them to be as bad as they were. But they certainly made some adjustments. Gary Patterson coming on, I don't think you can say didn't help. I mean, it certainly helped. Having, I think, two of the most well-regarded defensive minds in college football hanging around on the same staff certainly can't hurt you. What was the biggest driver in their improvement? Personnel adjusting Kwiatkowski's, understanding Kwiatkowski's system, some adjustments that Gary Patterson recommended, things like that. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint. There's a lot of different things. There's a lot of different balls in the air as to what actually led to so much defensive improvement for Texas, but massive improvement for them. But what you would expect from a fairly typical Kwiatkowski defense is they gave up some longer drives, right? Like if you are going to sell out to avoid giving up explosives, you're going to give up some more efficient stuff underneath, and that will lead, if you are going to give up points, it's more often that someone's put together a long drive to put up points. You can look at it, it's one or the other. I mean, drive efficiency and explosive drives are both really important, basically equal in their contribution to a defense's or offense's performance. So I think if you're Texas, you are looking, I don't ever expect a Kwiatkowski defense to get to, say like a number 1 or 2 in drive efficiency. I I think we could talk about them maybe getting up to like 12, 11 in that 10 range. Explosive drives, this is the one where they might be able to get even as high as the, number 1 overall. This is something Kwiatkowski defenses traditionally do a really good job with, is containing explosives. So that's one where we may see significant improvement, even though they're already within the top 5. Play efficiency, and again, like they do a decent job here limiting yards per play. They didn't do a great job with negative drives, forcing 3 and outs, forcing turnovers. That's something that I think they could certainly improve on coming in the next season, and it would help. I mean, really help overall, I think, what they're trying to do. They did have a decent run pass split. They were a lot better against the run than they were against the pass. I would actually say, if you were going to say like where Patterson came in, that was probably more there. Kwiatkowski at Washington, you could argue often only ran like 2 down linemen. That puts a lot. I mean, if you look in the NFL, some of the guys like defensive linemen that Washington has sent to the NFL, they're often guys that can play 2 gap. Texas really didn't have those guys. So schematically, Texas like wasn't necessarily set up at all to run what Kwiatkowski was running at Washington. It's not to say that they tried to like just copy paste, put it in, but I don't think that Texas had the dudes, particularly in the front 7. I do think you can pinpoint having some of Gary Patterson's influences like really helping to clean up what they were doing, stopping the run. The effective pass, this is a number I think they'd like to see improved coming into this year, get into the top 10. They did a decent job last season here, but I think, like I said, like there's significant room for improvement. To talk a little bit about like where they need to improve for the negative plays, the negative drives, they only created disruptive plays on 24% of plays. That's graded them out at 57 overall. And they gave up a first down on third down 41% of the time, which is 94 overall. I mean, they're negative. I mean, you can see it when you look at this. You're like, oh, that sort of makes sense, right? Like you give up third down conversions, like you're going to give up long drives for points, like, or you're not forcing 3 and outs, right? Like you're giving up those first downs. Texas needs to do a lot better job coming into this next year on those things, I think in particular, but you may see that show up more again, like I said, in the negative drives than you're going to see necessarily in the drive. That's only going to come down so much on a Kwiatkowski defense. The schedule's pretty favorable. I mean, so this is, did I get this? I just want to make sure I got this right. Texas, I can't remember. Are they with the team that has... Did I miss one? That would be totally me. Apologies for, solving this in real time. Oh, I did. What a doofus. Give me a second. I'll swap this out. All right. So Texas, that makes more sense. It's on a 12-game schedule. So Texas plays 12 games against FBS competition next season. So we don't have to add one. We have them projected at 10.5 wins, basically, and 8 wins on the 9-game conference schedule. Now, Texas is a significant, I mean, they're largely, if you look across their games, they're going to be a fairly significant favorite, but there are some particular watch outs. So Texas is obviously should handle Rice just fine. They're going to play at Alabama right now. I doubt this is true in Vegas, but they're a slight favorite in beta rank at Alabama. This is probably close to a toss up. I want to be frank. Like, I think the Tommy Rees hire for Alabama was a really bad hire. I think he underachieved his talent level at Notre Dame by a pretty wide margin. And I don't think that it was a Brian Kelly problem. Some of it is that I don't think Brian Kelly necessarily hires like amazing offensive coordinators anyway. But I was really surprised when Alabama went out and hired Rees. Texas should have an advantage. I mean, if you just look OC to OC, Texas is going to have an advantage there. I like the Kevin Steele hire for Alabama on defense. He's a really good defensive coordinator. That should be a fun matchup, getting to watch the Alabama defense against Sarkisian offense. But I do think that, Alabama is going to they might find themselves struggling a little bit against Kwiatkowski's defense in this game, which is may be a little bit of a surprise to people. Again, like this game's a bit of a toss up. Like if Texas is able to come out with a win here though, that's going to set them up pretty well, because over a lot of the rest of their schedule, I mean, and again, like, look, Texas was favored in a lot of their games last season. They did a lot of really dumb stuff. So that could happen again. We're sort of baking in that it doesn't. Texas gets Wyoming at home. Now, this is a Wyoming team that I think some people in the Mountain West are somewhat high on, but the Mountain West has been down for a bit. Wyoming might play this a little bit closer. Texas should be able to get past them pretty easily. This may be something closer to 24 points by the time it's played. Baylor certainly took a little bit of a step back last season. They've got some things to correct for. We've got them projected at 36 overall. Texas is a decent favorite in this game. I mean, we start to get into the range. Like as you start going through here, Texas should be around a 14-point favorite-ish, maybe a little more in a lot of these games coming up through this middle stretch here. With Baylor, Kansas, it's probably going to be less for Oklahoma. Oklahoma's not projected very high because they weren't very good last season. Oklahoma's a team that's likely going to beat their projection. But what you get with Baylor, Texas this is the kind of team that like Texas should absolutely beat, shouldn't necessarily have tremendous trouble with. But Texas just stubbed their toe a bunch last season. They're going to just need to avoid turnovers, be able to win games if they do have turnovers, right? Like not blow the game enough to lose it, right? Kansas is a team that I think is interesting and improving. I don't think Kansas is necessarily at a point where they're going to be able to catch a Texas that's potentially on the upswing here. The thing about Kansas runs such a fun, interesting offense. I'm interested and excited to see them next season. But I don't think that they're going to be able to largely test this Texas defense. I think Texas's defense should be in really good shape next season. Oklahoma's a really interesting one. A team that, because of where they're projected, because they were so bad last season, it's sort of like, I don't think we're going to get to a preview for Oklahoma. I certainly expect them to beat this. I expect this to be closer to 7 points by the time we get to it. Look, Oklahoma could be a lot better by the time we get to this point. And I think that'll be, that would be great for the sport, to have a fun Texas-Oklahoma game. But Texas should, again, this is a game that Texas should largely be able to control. They're further along in their, a lot further along in their rebuild. They're in sort of like the, win close last season. I mean, they did win some games closer than they should have, and they lost some dumb ones. But like Texas looked like a team that was like talented and starting to figure it out a bit last season, but was a bit inconsistent. Oklahoma just looked bad at large parts of last season. I hope for Oklahoma that they've made significant progress. We get Houston in what is now a conference game. Houston was really fun offensively last season, which was actually a bit of a turnaround. They had, I know Holgerson's noted for offense, but the prior two seasons, they've been really carried by their defense, coached by Doug Belk. I'm interested to see their defense fell off a little bit last season. I'm interested to see if they rebound a little bit. But I would not necessarily expect this game to be particularly close. Houston may take a little bit of a step back if the defense doesn't step up, because Clayton Tune is gone. Texas gets BYU. BYU is probably the least prepared of the teams joining the Big 12 conference. I don't think this is a Power 5 roster. I think they've got some building to do in order to be really competitive. And look, they'll be, Texas, if, BYU is going to have trouble competing with Texas or Oklahoma when they're clicking, no matter what. A lot of teams in the current Big 12 would. But I think BYU's got a little bit of a step to even catch, like a Baylor when they're clicking, or like a Kansas State when they're clicking. Kansas State is a team that we have projected decently coming into next year. They put it together. Look, Colin Klein really stepped into the offensive coordinator role and has done a really good job with that. I think the defense is still fairly interesting. That North Dakota State defense that has been imported into the FBS at a couple different places has largely been pretty good. I think this is probably going to be an interesting game, You know, like this is a game that could be like, and we have it projected even at home. Texas is only about a touchdown favorite. This is the game that might, you know, like, I mean, might decide things for Texas if Kansas State is beating their projections a little bit. Like I think Texas is largely good enough to get through most of the Big 12 schedule unscathed. Some of these games that, I mean, like that Oklahoma game, you know, maybe that Kansas game, they start to get close, you know, they start to get close enough where if like Kansas or Oklahoma are beating their projections, like Texas, you know, finishes -2 on turnovers, they might lose that game. I mean, you could have a bad night out there and drop a game. And that's where like this Kansas State game, I think, becomes sort of interesting because, you know, it might be enough to keep Texas out of like a Big 12 title game appearance, that kind of thing. TCU, I think is going to be rebuilding a little bit. I think that's a reasonable assessment coming into this season. It's probably going to be around 10 points by the time it opens. Iowa State's been really shuffling along on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, I think that's largely been true for a lot of that coaching staff's time in Ames, but the defense has been pretty good under John Heacock, and they were decent last season. That makes them sort of an interesting one to watch. Texas Tech, the defense was fantastic under Tim DeRuyter last season. I want to see if that holds up coming into next year. He had some ho-hum years, including a year as the defensive coordinator at Oregon, which did not work out at all. But I'm interested to see if that sort of continues forward. Texas Tech looked like a team that if they could just keep a QB upright and keep them from throwing interceptions, Texas Tech was a pretty fun and interesting team last year too. So this is a fun, I mean, like Texas is not, I mean, what's interesting, I think in here, even though we have Texas projected at number 6, is like, as usual, the Big 12 doesn't project to be horrible, you know, like across the board. They project to be largely solid. Texas doesn't project to be so much better than them that they're going to run away with it. And a lot of these games are close enough that like Texas, you know, stubs their toe and they might walk away with a loss, which they did a lot last season. Texas last season was a team that if they stubbed their toe, if it didn't work, if things went wrong, it usually was a couple things going wrong and then they lost the game. So yeah, I mean, look, I mean, if you want to, I 100% get it. If you're one of those people that is, you know, just looks at a record and is going to come back and just say Texas was bad last season and, you know, like they always get projected to be good. But I think what makes Texas interesting this season in particular versus just like, oh yeah, you know, it's just the recruiting rankings driving their projection. And, you know, like if it's just the recruiting rankings, you know, you'd be talking about a team that would, you know, like would project in the top 20. Being where we've got them at number 6, it's because they were good last season in large part. They also were bad in smaller parts, and it killed them. I think for Texas coming into this year, though, it really does. I mean, look, there's some things we could talk about, like keep an eye on as we're going through here. Keep an eye on where the pass defense is. Keep an eye on where that third down percentage is. If they're forcing more turnovers, I think those things are critical for them to improve defensively. But I really think it all comes down to this team is like, can the quarterback give you a legitimate passing threat? And I don't think it, I just, after what we saw last season, Ewers looked, and I'll say like, we just sort of finish with this. Ewers looked really bad. I mean, he looked really bad last season. I'd be surprised to see him last. I mean, look, and if he's playing anything like he was last season, he shouldn't be the quarterback at Texas, right? Like he should be transferring somewhere else. He can go, you know, be the next quarterback that has to suffer at South Carolina or something. Anyway, let's wrap it up because it's late my time. Anyway, I'm Rob Bowron. I'm the econometrician behind Beta Rank. You can find all the stats you just saw and a whole lot more at sharpcollegefootball.com. You can find me at Beta Rank FB. I will try to answer questions once a week. Ish, maybe more. You can also find me at Sharp College Football. We have a Pac-12 podcast. We're going to get kicked off again at 12 Pack Radio. You can find all the stats, or you can find all the back episodes of that at sharpcollegefootball.com/12 Pack Radio. I'm traveling this week for work. I'll be in LA. So I won't be doing videos till probably sometime next weekend. It might be a week before I get back to making another video. And I think we've got, is it Tennessee next? I think it is, which is again, like Tennessee's a team that has it together offensively. The question for Tennessee you know, it is Tennessee. The question for Tennessee is like, can they get the defense to take a step forward? Because the offense is really there, and I think will stay there. Like Heupel's been terrific as an OC. Anyway, let's go ahead and let's call it. Thank you so much for tuning in.